Okay. Sorry. So we should have covered the report writing from the video, right? And we are gonna do just the Unit 11, which is the last lecture. So if you didn't get a chance to complete last week's assignment, even though we didn't have to come to class, right? I assigned an assignment and maybe a quiz review. So make sure that you look back and go through if you haven't done that. So that way you can submit it. So today we are going to go over interviewing witness and talking about your role as a witness in case that if you are doing digital forensic investigation and it needs to go to court. Sorry, I'm trying to get my app. And let's share. Before we do that, let's get caption. Okay. So as an investigator, you will be expected in some cases to go to court. And when you go to court proceeding, it could be in various scenarios where if the case can be part of a trial, and this is when you work for like the law enforcement or agency, or even when you're doing investigation within the organization, and if it's like fraudulent related, sometime you would have to provide your finding on the artifacts. So as a forensic investigator, when do you actually testify? We can say that sometime we might be testifying in front of the grand jury when we're subpoenaed. So that means that you would have to provide your report, your findings. As an expert in the field at that point, you want to be able to describe what you're finding and how that relates to the particular case. And remember, at the beginning of the class, we want to talk about our perspective is always going to be neutral going into the investigation. And then where the findings take us, that's going to be the conclusive result. So it's important that we start with the neutral view. We're not going to be biased, right? And then we are going to provide what we find. And we want to be able to validate what we find multiple times so that way it can withstand questions from our testimony. It might be going through evidentiary hearing. Sometimes this is related to a trial, could be a short or a lengthy trial, and then in deposition. So that's what the attorneys. So what you would see is that your viewpoints in the investigation or your results in the investigation can be important. It would also change, right, the outcome of a case for someone or for something. So that's important. And so you can find this information on the first page of the notes. It kind of talk about becoming an eyewitness or a witness, an eyewitness, right? So you can find all of that information here. I did not include detention hearing, but sometimes that might be the case where you have to appear before the judge and then you will be able to provide information. So it's not in the complete trial arraignment and so on. So in some cases, you are gonna become a witness. And so here, kind of talk about the courtroom, the element and roles in the courtroom. So for the next question, it says, what is the role of the digital investigator in the criminal or civil jurisdiction processes? Your role is going to be to testify as an expert witness or a witness, right? And when we become an expert witness, we are just having the skill sets and the knowledge in the area that we're testifying for. So you might have years of experience in this area, and so that will make you also become an expert witness. So as a digital investigator, you can hold this type of role. Now, the difference between these two roles, sorry, I'm not sure if you're able to get all the first part of the question. Let me move some of this up so we can include all of them. Okay, so the difference between the witness and an expert witness when you're testifying for digital forensic case, an expert witness can offer opinion after stating the facts. A regular witness can only offer evidence or factual account. So if you are invited to be participating in like a court case as a witness, you can only state what is in your finding. Okay. An expert witness, if you are holding this role, you're able to give your professional opinion. Okay. And you see this in like TV shows or real cases where the investigator would offer their expert professional opinion. And you see this with like doctors and psychologists, and so they're, they were invited as expert witness. That means that you can include the opinion. If a regular witness, we are not able to include opinion. But in both cases, right, you have to make sure that you document and provide clear facts, evidence, and then conclusive findings. So last week, right, as we watched the video and did the assignment, it talked about creating a report. So for your project, you will be expected to be able to create a report. I think I provided some templates on the assignment page. And then we'll talk a little bit more about your project when you come back next week. So we have to document clearly, and we have to be able to state that for the report. Now your report can go into your portfolio, right? And that you can showcase the skill sets that you have acquired from the class. So how do you prepare to become a witness in a case? What should you include, right? So the question 4 asks you, what can you do to prepare the testimony as a witness or an expert witness? So in the case, likely that you will have attorneys or lawyers that are going to be communicating on both sides, because when you become a witness, both sides needs to be aware, right? So you will need to communicate with the attorneys. They will identify their requirements for successful outcomes on both sides, prosecutor and defense. You need to learn everything about the participants, suspects, victims, and the attorneys in the case, in the proceeding. It's good that we understand their viewpoints and also who we're communicating with or who's going to be our audience. The third element is going to be education. So you need to be educated about the points of dispute in the proceeding. What could be a counter reaction to what you would be stating? So you should have an expectation of how you would respond to that. right? Because that's the role of the attorney is going to be that they're gonna counter argue what you have stated as an expert witness or a witness. So we should have some expectation on what they might be asking or they might be counter argue. We need to research opposition expert witness because they would have their own. So, and their prior testimony. They could be professionals in their fields. So you would be able to identify their experience, and that can be found from just, searching maybe social media or online. And then in many cases, as they are a witness, they also need to their information need to be provided by their attorneys. So you can find some of that information. Okay. The reason why this is included predominantly in this chapter is because digital forensic normally is related to legal aspect of cases. So if you work in this area, it is expected that you would have some kind of legal participation. Any question? Okay, so we talked about the difference in the role and how we can prepare for our testimony. In the next part, we are going to state the type of questions that we would prepare ourselves when we testify. And these are the questions that you kind of have to think about, right? Approaching the case at the beginning. So, because, in the aspect that that you are going, your result is going to be presented to an audience in court, right? And that can determine the outcome of an individual, a company, or whatever, right? We kind of want to think about these questions throughout. One, what is the theory of the case, right? So we would state the theory and then the alternative hypothesis for the theory. And so that was, we provide the evidence to really prove, right, the hypotheses for the theory. So you have to think about the theory of the case. Does my theory fit within the facts of the case? Okay. What facts are central to my testimony? So those are the things that you're going to highlight when you state your testimony, right? First, they're going to ask you about your name, right? Your professional criteria or credential. How long have you been in the field? All of those things to really establish, right, your integrity with the audience. That's usually the attorney. They're going to ask you those questions to state your name and all of that information. And then you would proceed in telling them about your theory and the facts that you find to back up your theory. So lastly, the facts that can I confirm or cannot confirm? So that will be the conclusive finding based on your evidence that you have found from your forensic work. So these 4 questions are important. We want to think about these, right? Because as you write your report, you also need to be able to kind of build up the answers to these questions for your testimony. So working from a legal purview, like a legal perspective, is going to be a little different than when you're just doing forensic to do incident response in a regular cybersecurity case. right? I know some of you are pursuing this professionally, right? I think it's great. This is a very small niche that a lot of people get into, but all of us in, especially if you get into cybersecurity, you're gonna have to touch forensic one way or another. So it's important. And then, you know, you might work for a company in the private sector, but you know, that case could be related to, you know, a group action or something that would be related to law, and then you have to go to court. So you should have some kind of knowledge in how you would approach it. That's important. So when you become a witness, you need to provide your professional background, and a lot of that is really a resume, right? A curriculum vitae, a CV, I know some of you are familiar with this. It is more of a detailed document where it states, you know, your experience and your knowledge and your background, similar to a resume, but just extended. So a CV would highlight your professional experience, your education, like what you would see on a resume, and this document is going to be reviewed by both attorneys or the group of attorneys on both sides. In order to become an expert witness, you have to provide this information to them, right? And then the attorneys would, you know, they would present it to the judge whether they agree that you would become an expert witness or not, right? So simply state your professional experience, your education information. So let's say that you've been doing digital forensic for a few years. You can state your experience with the organization that you're with, whether it is an organization that specifically do this, a cybersecurity service company, or maybe you're working for the sheriff department, Riverside County, you know, Orange County, etc., right? So we want to be able to state our background professionally and our education. Your certifications and things goes on here, right? As I mentioned, I think I put a page on the first module where you can obtain certification information. I encourage you to do that. I know that EC Console offer an associate in digital forensic, but you can get it with GIAC and other entities. Okay, so what would be like the main elements of your curriculum vitae or your CV? And what kind of things you want to highlight for your digital forensic investigator role as a witness? Similar to a resume, you want to include your full name, your title, right? It could be that you are a digital forensic specialist or an investigator. It depends on the title that you have earned or that you worked in. And then your contact information, similar to a resume at the top. And then in the body, you would want to include the field of expertise on the CV and identify the area of the field for your testimony. So you want to highlight some of the skill sets in digital forensic that you specialize in the body of your CV. Okay. And the experience. So the experience is going to follow next. So it's going to be a synopsis of your career, your education, and your experience. So for somebody that's been in the field for a long time, let's say 10 years, they might have worked at multiple places, so that will be included. And we want to do chronological order, very similar to a resume, right? And then if you have any kind of recognition, publications, awards, licensing, that just really enforcing like the expertise that you have. So publication, awards, licensing, membership, and previous testimony. And so you should follow this main aspect and do that for your resume, right? A resume should be a very quick summary about who you are professionally and what you can do for the company. So a CV is the same. It's just a little bit more detailed. It might be longer than one page, right? So most people that been in the field for a long time, it's hard to be doing a one-page resume. I get, so when I submit for grants, I have to do the same thing. Like what makes me an expert for some technological area and grant area, National Science Foundation and other entities that funds the money, they want to know who I am, right? Before they give us the money. So I have to submit a CV. So the other day we submitted for a $12 million grant. So I sent in my CV, and my CV is like 6 pages. And they told me to condense it into one page. You know how long it took me to kind of think about like what to keep and what to get rid of? Because that's like my whole entire life on 6 pages, right? So it's kind of hard as you move along, right? In your career, and as you get older and then you build your work experience, it's hard to condense things onto a simple page, I believe. So you kind of have to decide on like, what should I highlight? So the important part is to make sure that this speaks to what you can do for the case or what you can do for the company. I tell my students that all the time. I said, don't just put a lot of stuff, but put meaningful things on there, right? Things that would be relevant to the person who reads your resume or your CV. So, and that takes time to really customize. So that's important to think about. Okay, any questions? We're almost done. We have a few more to go. Okay. So there's preparation information, the differences, the questions that we talked about, right? And then what you should do, practice answering questions as you go through the preparations. And then your CV. And you want to use CV instead of a resume because you want to kind of talk about the tools, the technological skills, all of those things are important, right? Also licensing, membership, awards. And for you guys, right, at the cusp of AI, it's great to ask AI to give you templates of that, to look at examples of resume and CV online and compare it and see how you can adjust yours to something that would be more modern and adequate. AI would, sometimes it's inflated, but for the basic things like that, I think it's useful. Okay. There's some guidelines about how you would testify. That's in the following section. But for number 8, it says, how would you provide your testimony in a trial as an expert witness? Right? You would be able to include your opinions because you're an expert witness based on factual findings. You need to explain technical details in simple terms. And this area is difficult for many people, including me, right? Sometimes even when I talk to students, when I start a technical class, sometimes I make an assumption that they might know of a tool or a technology like VirtualBox, right? And then sometimes I catch myself. So you always need to assume that they do not know the tools that might be very common. So you need to be simplifying how you're describing or explaining technological terms and tools. Make sure that we define those things. Even when we say like malware, don't assume that everybody knows, even though, you know that technology touches everybody, but people might not know what that is, right? And you need to speak clear and slow. And then you want to have analogies or example, right? When you explain complex details. And you need to think about that when you interview. When you interview for technical work, right? especially when they ask questions, also soft skill questions they like to ask. But use analogies or example or an explanation following your answer. But don't keep it too long. For this, make sure that we have analogies. Okay, so we want to when we are an expert witness, we have to make sure that our work has integrity. It speaks to the quality of what we find, right? So that means that we need to make sure that guidelines are followed. We need to make sure that regulations, state, federal, and other areas, even internal practices for the company, if that's the case, but regulations are followed, policy rules are followed. And we also want to include best practices. Okay. So there are formal documentations that you can refer to online. They have, guidelines that you can use for forensic. I think we talked about that before. Templates for the industry that's recommended. You want to either reference those or use some form of template or references so that way you're not far off. But ultimately, we have validation, right? We talked about from tools validation to matching up and finding accuracy in your result, doing it multiple times so you can produce accuracy. And that's important. Okay. And with forensic, that it's going to take time for one scan, but you have to repeatedly do it. So this type of work takes patience and heart. So you have to love what you do. It is a little bit different than other security things, but definitely you might run across forensic requirement one way or another. Any questions? Okay, let's move 9 down now to the next one in case you're still recording that. And for 10 is that what is considered to be an ethical practice? So we want to be ethical, right? We talked about this from the beginning in how we're finding facts. We want to be neutral but ethical at the same time. In the security world, right? Even if you're privileged to a certain type of information, if it is not in your realm to gather that data, you do not touch it, right? So ethical practices and principle we want to keep. So your moral principles that govern the behavior of a person or activity, that will be an ethical practice. And then for 9, I think we touch on guidelines, right? And you have to have evidence that are credible, reliable, accurate, relevant. Right. In the case that it might be questioned. So we want to make sure that it's clear and accurate. And ethical behavior for our notes, you can refer to page 4. And then in following that, it gives you some reference on where you can look up code of ethics information, which brings us to the next question. What resources will provide code of ethics for computer forensic investigation? You can refer to International Association of Computer Investigative Specialists, IACIS. You can also refer to International Society of Forensic Computer Examiners, ISFCE. And that, so in some area, when you're looking at like ethical hacking and forensic investigation, this focuses specifically on the code of ethics for forensic investigation, right? Those are the two references that you can use. Why did we choose the international one? So in the case that now that you know that people work remotely from everywhere, people can apply to job anywhere in the world, right? For a lot of the remote jobs. So in many cases, you have enterprises that have facility across the world, or in some criminal investigation cases that might touch another country or multiple countries. So just like how I read that there was, attacks from a group from Iraq, right? And they were able to track which group that is, but they were not able to catch them. So some investigation would touch multiple country and the attack impact not just North American country. So it could be that they have multiple targeted type of organization. So what you would see is you would use international if it is relevant to that, but there are national code of ethics. You can refer to NIST and other online resources for reference information. So if I love doing this, right? I can get certification in this area. And just keep in mind that certification now requires you to be able to answer the questions correctly, but you also have to have some kind of activity questions where you have to do things. So we want to prepare for those certifications accordingly. So for number 12, it says describe the value of industry certification to digital forensic career. Why is this needed, right? Like a lot of the technical area in this industry, like your cybersecurity, ethical hacking, what you would see is that you would be able to use certification to verify the skills and knowledge for that career. Can someone get a certification and not get work? Sure, right? It really, also there are other factors that play in. Personality, communication skills. There are other areas, right? Can someone get a certification but not be able to perform something? Sure. Sometimes you can just study for a test. If you're a good test taker, you might be able to pass the test. But I want you to think about having a certification and having the skills to speak to it. If you can do, right, you can walk the walk, then you are good, you're a professional. So certification allows you to verify the skills that you have. And then it requires that you update your skills and knowledge. So to renew your certification, you have to retrain, recertify, or, go take a class or be able to get the credit units that you need for certifications every 3 years. That's most technical certification. And then you can use certification to maintain practices under the ethical principles for the field. And that just tell the world that you are able to perform as a professional in this area. That's why we push a lot of certification, is to get you launch your career, is because to the employers, when they look at this, they can say, oh, so-and-so have the appropriate skills that is required. Practice test is okay. That's the very basic, but I encourage you to get certification in this technical area, right? If this is what you'd want to do, focus on that. If cybersecurity or IT is what you want to do, you want to get. Now, I was helping a student yesterday, a student that graduated and got the bachelor degree, and looking at like the type of work that can be. So we were looking at salary and the type of jobs, right? But ultimately looking at most of the cybersecurity work now require multiple certification, Security Plus, CASP, right? If you want to get into this area, they also require multiple certifications. So, you know, it's, even though the jobs are abundantly there, the competitiveness doesn't change. So you just gonna have to do as much as you can to market yourself, right? And that's all she wrote, actually. Okay, so when we have time, look through the notes. There are details in here that I didn't include in all the questions, right? That's gonna help you understand a little bit more about some areas of this particular chapter. And then there's certifications. And then let me see if I can. Let me go to my dashboard. So this is one class that I previously obtained some access to vouchers for the associate in forensic, but I didn't maintain it because there was low demand for it, and I could not justify spending thousands of dollars and then 2 students use it, so I lost it. I can go back and I can ask them to repurchase that. They did approach me a while back asking me. I just didn't, you know, if there's demand for it, we'll be able to find the funding to support it. So I'll go back and ask. And if I do have it, I'll let everybody know. You know, the process of buying things is gonna be a little bit longer than most. Okay. But if you are looking to obtain certification, there's a page on the first module. I think I put a list of different certification and links to it. So there is specifically data forensic for CompTIA A+. This is somewhat a little bit new. We don't have CompTIA for this. If I have some money, I'll look into buying a little bit of it. Usually we'll start with like 20, and if we have more demand. If you want to be an incident responder, I think some of you are in the cybersecurity area. There is also a computer hacking forensic investigator. There are focused specifically on hacking investigation. So attack vector here. And then network forensic analyst. And then if you want to be specifically for the examiner, like what we talked about in the chapter, you can refer to this certification, your GCFE. And it talks about the requirement, how much it is. Usually they're under 90 questions, and then you just have to pass it with 70 or 80%. Okay. All right. But this one is, you know, you have 3 hours instead of 90 minutes. Okay. So we'll stop the recording, take a break. You can grab a drive and get started. But if you need some break for restroom and snack, we can do that.